Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Downpour, Emerald City Hockey, and Circling Seattle Sports Seattle Torrent podcast. Charles, we're back.
This is going to be a very conflicting emotions episode because it's great to be back, of course, and to talk about who's going to be here. On the other hand, there are people who are not going to be here that we have to talk about, Dylan, and it'll be tough. It was always going to be tough coming off the inaugural season, right? Because you knew there were going to be players who were not going to come back. They couldn't just completely run it back with the entirely same roster. But yeah, at least there's some movement. I think a lot of the fan base, whether it's the Torrent or the league, wish the movement and the way those moves are happening was a bit more clear and, easily understandable.
Yeah. Oh, what are you talking about? The 5-phase plan wasn't very clear.
Six.
Six phase plan. Yes, you're right. And we'll get into that. We'll go phase by phase and kind of go chronologically what has happened. But yeah, as Charles alluded to, lots of things have changed. A coaching change has happened. Well, it's not even done happening because we don't have a replacement for head coach Steve O'Rourke. We'll talk about that today. We'll catch up on who the Torrent have protected and signed and who will for sure be on the roster, who we think might be staying on the roster, the players guaranteed to have left the roster, and just everything else that's kind of going on as the PWHL is undergoing their second round of expansion. 4 new teams added to the league as we kind of thought was going to happen through most of the year. They were pushing for that 4-team expansion. They're able to make it work, and we are currently in phase 3, I believe. Yes, we're in phase 3, which is when players get to protect more players. And we do have news that Julia Gosling this morning was signed and protected for the Seattle Torrent. So that brings them up to 4 players at this time of recording here on June 10th.
But still time.
Yep, there's still time. Maybe something will happen while we're recording. That would be really nice. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through the phases of this expansion process and what it's meant for the Torrent and kind of talk about everything that's happened there. So we'll go ahead and we'll start at phase 1. This is what kicked off back at the beginning of June, and that was when players could protect three teams could protect 3 players. And the Seattle Torrent, this allowed teams to sign players that were on expiring contracts to extensions and then protect them or protect players already under contract. And the 3 players the Seattle Torrent protected was forward Alex Carpenter, who was signed to a deal in order to be protected, defender Anna Wilgren, and goaltender Hannah Murphy. So, Charles, your thoughts on the 3 players that general manager Megan Turner decided to protect and how the process played out?
On specifically the players they protected, yeah, I mean, like Carpy made sense. I think I was a little like I think we talked about it on the show and even off camera, Dylan. Like I was wondering, and a lot of people were wondering with Alex Carpenter, considering she'd been on the team at the bottom of the standings for the first 3 years of PWHL's existence. Like she's super underrated. I cannot overstate how underrated she is, just how good she was in the face-off circle for you. I mean, I don't know if there was anybody even close to her face-off numbers wise on this Torrent team. Like one of the more underrated true centers in this league. I don't know how many true centers there are. What the amount of point production she routinely gets. I think it's 3 straight seasons with 20 points. She's one of a few players, and one of the other players in that list is Marie-Philippe Poulin. Like anytime you're with MPP, it's a good thing. So yeah, with Alex specifically, I think it's a big deal to lock her down to a 3-year contract, if I remember that correctly. Like that's
yes.
You keep your and considering who wasn't protected, which I'm sure you want to maybe keep separate, so we'll talk about only who was protected. I imagine Alex is your captain now, and that was something that former head coach Steve O'Rourke talked about with us and that little last homestand of the year, right? Like how Alex stepped up leadership wise once Hillary went down with an injury that she suffered during the Olympics. Which was a big deal. Like she can score, she can pass, she's good in the face-off circle, she can eat a ton of minutes, she's a leader for you. She's a little bit younger than Hillary was, which I don't mean to keep referencing someone we'll talk about, but I think it makes a ton of sense. And she's already, like, if you want to talk about off the ice sort of thing, She is involved in the community with
Mhm.
the aquarium. Like I, the aquarium should have like a little plaque for Alex Carpenter near the otters or something at this point. Um, there's that. This was interesting. I'm going to go to Hannah Murphy here. People, at least to folks that we talked to, weren't sure about protecting a goaltender. And,
Mhm.
I think I thought it made sense considering that Hannah's young. They obviously believed in her to take her in the second round,
Yeah.
right? She showed some good flashes. She showed some games. I don't put a lot of her bad games and numbers on her, right, Dylan? Knowing how aggressive your blue line was and was taught to be.
Yes.
Um, they like her size, they like her maneuverability. Um, like they believe in her again to take her in the second round when you already had Corinne Schroeder under contract. Like I'm sure they had a vision of having her be your future, even without knowing that this expansion process would effectively take Corinne from you. So I liked it, and especially when you saw the other teams' protection lists protecting a goalie, you kind of
Mhm.
had to, because yes, when it was just what uh, 6 teams, 8 teams with
6.
Seattle and
Oh, yeah,
Vancouver.
yeah, 8.
Yeah, with them, like every team has a star stud goalie. But when
Mhm.
you add four more, it starts to get more complicated, right? Um, and there's not a ton, there's like a couple goalies I like in this draft, but it's not like you can bank on not protecting a goaltender. So I really like that protection. Anna Wilgren, I think, is the most controversial of the three, just because other people wanted maybe Kayla Barnes, which I understand. I just, like we talked about before we started recording, Dylan, they really believe in her. They don't think that the lack of point production was a true testament to the player she is, right? Like Steve O'Rourke lightly compared her to Cale Makar, and he wasn't meaning specifically the player, and I don't know if he means like all the accolades and such, but like the way she can move the puck, like the potential for point production, and that's not a small thing to do to like comparison wise. So, I mean, you got a young blue liner, a young goaltender, and a forward and leader that can kind of stabilize you for the next 3 years. I think it makes sense. I know maybe that's controversial because it's tough. It was always going to be tough depending on who they protected and who they didn't. But I can see a vision with this like initial three, and I appreciate that. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, no, and I feel very similar. Alex Carpenter, one of the best players, if not the best player on this Torrent team through year one. She is somebody that is a bona fide star player in the PWHL. Protecting a player like that absolutely makes sense. She gives you scoring up front, which is kind of the thing that has been hardest to come by for the Torrent and really all teams in the PWHL so far through the league's 3-year existence. So having somebody who is a reliable scorer, like you mentioned earlier about the point production, everything really important. Somebody who can win faceoffs. You feel comfortable starting her in the offensive or defensive zone, right? You can have her take some big key faceoffs in the defensive zone and trust that she's going to be able to get the puck up the ice, get your team attacking in transition, something that Megan Turner talked about wanting to be more of the identity of this team moving forward. And I think I'll talk about that more when we get to Anna Wilgren. But yeah, with Alex Carpenter, makes sense as as far as if you're going to be protecting a goalie, you want to protect somebody from the blue line that can maybe help out your team identity. Carpenter made a lot of sense to be the forward that was protected first, just because of how good she already is. She's still relatively young. She's going to have several years of good hockey still in front of her, and she provides more than just say goal scoring or oh she's a great playmaker. She is a good two-way center, most premium position out there on the ice. And then the leader, the off-ice stuff, like everything you mentioned, Alex Carpenter should become the face of the Seattle Torrent kind of moving forward. And I think that that's, a really solid foundational piece that the Torrent get to build around there with her. On Hannah Murphy, yeah, 7 out of 8 teams, I think it was, protected a goalie. So goaltending was definitely going to be hard to come by if you didn't protect a goaltender. I think I mean, certainly all of us were pretty impressed with what she was able to do as a rookie, coming in and making the starts that she was able to make, playing behind a defense that wasn't always the kindest to whoever was in net last year. She did a really good job dealing with that pressure, including very early on in the season, right? I mean, she was thrown in there pretty early on, and
Mhm.
she was able to rise to that occasion. And so I think I'm with you as the league continues to expand. One of the things I did talk about before was that there wasn't a lot of talent dilution amongst the goaltending pool when the league was smaller. Now that you're getting to 12 teams, there's going to be more of that dilution, but I don't know that you're going to have that on the high end. And Megan Turner talked about it in her presser after these first protections were made, just how much they believe in Hannah Murphy's potential and
Mhm.
how much they feel like they can trust her moving forward. And I think that that's really important. And clearly, the team views her as somebody capable of being a foundational goaltender that they can build around for many, many years, just like all of the more established names that were protected this time around in the expansion process. And again, Hannah Murphy had an unbelievably strong rookie year. It was not the easiest of circumstances, just with the new team in front of her, a team that didn't have a lot of chemistry, a team that did not play a goaltending friendly style in front, right? She handled all of that adversity very, very well, put up some very good numbers, was hanging out with the big names in the league for parts of last season, right? There
Right.
were stretches where she was playing at that level of one of the top goaltenders in the league. So I definitely think that it makes sense that if you believe she has that potential, you need to make sure that you lock her up and you keep her with your franchise. And then with Anna Wilgren, I do think, yes, they also believe in the potential there. One of the things that Megan Turner really talked about in terms of how they kind of decided on these being the three players that they initially protected was the mix of having players that have experience, so and youth and everything like that, right? And so they didn't want to just protect all the youngest players that they had. They wanted to make sure that they still had some experience that could go out there, be competitive next year right away. I think it's very well known that fans did a great job of showing up for the Seattle Torrent team this past season, and they did not get the best results. And I think the team knows that they want to be able to win some games next year for those fans, and have maybe at times a better product on the ice for them. But at the same time, you didn't necessarily want to lean into protecting a bunch of players in their 30s. You need to have some foundational pieces that you can have that are going to be young enough to continue to grow, get better, but also be around for several years so that once the league kind of stops with this expansion madness, we'll call it, where names are constantly shuffling in and out of these rosters, you're going to be able to have some core foundational pieces that fans
Right.
can become attached to and really spend many years with. That's just important to the fan experience in any sporting league. And so I think that that's kind of the direction that Megan Turner was going there. And with Anna Wilgren, because of her age, being 26, she has many years of hockey in front of her, but she does have experience playing in the PWHL already. I think one of the things that was important to protecting her potentially was the fact that she's unbelievably durable. She has never missed a PWHL game yet so far in her career. She is somebody
Wow.
that you can count on to always be out there, always be playing. Megan Turner talked about kind of the identity for the team moving forward being one where they wanted to play hard and physical in the defensive zone, something that Anna Wilgren can do, somebody who can block shots and play physical net front, things like that. They want to be relentless in the offensive zone. Anna Wilgren can certainly help there. We saw that plenty last season, led the Torrent blue line in scoring last year, a very talented blue line. Anna Wilgren was your points leader there. And then, most importantly, I think Megan Turner, she wants a team that can attack in transition. And this is, if you follow really hockey at any level all around the world, the way that the game has evolved in, really the 21st century, but in the last 10 or 15 years has been to evolve into transitional attacks. And this goes in just about every league as players are getting faster and more skilled. And the PWHL is no exception. And so being able to attack off the rush, get the puck out of the blue line, out of the defensive zone quickly, move through the neutral zone, attack off the rush in the offensive zone. And Anna Wilgren, being a very good skater, being a very good passer, is somebody who can help you do that either by carrying the puck up the ice herself or by making that outlet pass to a forward that gets them moving with speed and puts that pressure on the other team. So I think there were times last year where Anna Wilgren's game was a little maybe all over the place at times, right? There was times where she was a little too aggressive, maybe in certain situations, tried to jump into situations that maybe she should have played a little more conservative. But she has all the makings to be a true star defender in this league, somebody who can play both ways, somebody who you can trust in big moments, whether you're down a goal and you need one or you're protecting a 1-goal lead. I think she does have the makings of that kind of defender that you want out there eating the big minutes, playing in those very difficult situations. And the vibe I got from Megan Turner was very much they believe she has that ability, and they're just now going to focus on putting her in a system where that truly comes out and she's able to play to the best of her abilities.
And with Wilgren, and you mentioned her play kind of being all over the place, one of the things that sticks out to me and that stuck out as the season went on, we'll keep bringing him up because he maybe he wasn't the best coach, but he was very insightful. O'Rourke said, hey, like Anna Wilgren during the season, probably like the game she was playing might have been more tuned to what she thought the USA wanted her to play like instead of what Anna Wilgren plays like at her best form. And so, when we saw what the 2-point game late, the 3-point game she had in the final, like I'm not saying she's gonna get 3 points every night. That'd be great. Like then
Yeah.
then we'd really get into kind of Kale McCarr.
Yeah.
But like she did seem a bit more free once we gotten past I almost said the World Cup. Once we got past the Olympics, World Cup of hockey. I think that's big too, where you don't have to worry about, hey, Team USA, the Olympics, like that in any post-mortem of the Torrent season, I do think you have to bring up the Olympics and how it
Yeah.
affected, not only the group that actually went and medaled or whatever, but how it affected chemistry. Because again, as you and I have talked about, it's all been talked about. There have been so many stops and starts throughout the year. It was
Mhm.
like, hey, you had the rivalry series, you had some players coming in late from internationals when training camp started, you had the Olympics. Like, as tight as the group was, like they could have been even tighter and probably would have played better, maybe systems wise, if they didn't have to deal with so many stops and starts,
Mhm.
And so that one of the effects of that is, Anna Wilgren probably saying, hey, I need to do this to make the Olympic roster. And she didn't. And I know that was tough. So, yeah, what does that look like what does a season for her look like this upcoming year where you're not in your head about that when you have some, as you mentioned, with expansion out of the way, like some certainty, right? Where it's like, oh, I don't know where I'll be next year. I think like mentally that is a lot because you see that in all kinds of sports, right, Dylan? Like
Mhm.
not just hockey, but like once the deadline passes, for like a trade deadline, players can kind of calm down a little bit, especially if you're kind of on that fringe. Because you have some certainty, you have some comfort in knowing where you're going to be. So yeah, I think that'll be big for Anna personally, both the Olympic part and just maybe being able to settle down a little bit. Same thing with Hannah. Yeah, I mean, you talk about kind of how she weathered the storm throughout the year. She's someone too where I was always really impressed. And it's not to say the other goalies didn't do this. We'd get out of practice, Dylan. She'd already be out of there watching film. Like,
Mhm.
so, yeah, like we've explained it, but like as you mentioned, to ahead, you've got players that are experienced. There is that youth element, but they're not like so young that it's just going to be almost like an inaugural season too. But it kind of will be, maybe depending on how the roster looks at the end of the year. But yeah, they won't be like the baby Torrent, where it's just like rookie and second year players. Like I do think that's important to have some foundation because you can have some foundation now,
Yes.
right? You can set something up and plan for a longer term vision because I don't imagine the league wants to add 4 more teams and more chaos next year. I think that would, if they do, uh, we'll have a different conversation.
Yeah.
But it seems like they kind of want to let this mellow out for a bit
Yeah.
after this process.
Yeah, definitely. And then the final player that we can talk about being officially protected and for sure being here is, of course, Julia Gosling, who was signed today. Right now, the Torrent are in the middle, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, are in the middle of phase three, which is when all the existing teams can protect and or sign and protect three additional players. So Julia Gosling is the first of those three that's been announced. This window exists from today through Friday, the 12th. So it's a 3-day window. So that's why we didn't get an announcement of all three players that the Torrent are going to have during this window, is they have a couple days to negotiate with players and figure out what they want to do. But Julia Gosling will be returning, somebody I think very important to everything we just talked about, right? A player that is relatively young, somebody still developing, coming into her own as a player, but who does have a couple years of experience now under her belt in the PWHL, has an Olympics under her belt as a player, playing with Team Canada, a tournament she did very well in. And talked about it earlier, scoring is at a premium in this league. Julia Gosling has one of the best shots in the PWHL. To be able to bring back a young forward with as much potential as she has, I think was very, very important to this team. And, depending on what systems they're running next year, hopefully she doesn't have a final 3-month window where she goes goalless, which I don't think will happen again. That was pretty abnormal for her. But I do think it was really important because of the players that were left unprotected after that first group of protections, Julia Gosling was the one that stood out to me that the Torrent had to try to bring back if possible.
Mm.
Once Hannah Bilka left, Julia Gosling was the forward I felt like they needed to bring back if they want to be able to, you know, I don't want to say be competitive next year, but be able to hang offensively with some of the other teams in the league.
Sure. Yeah, and you mentioned the goal drought. To go back to another Steve quote, what stood out, and I think you and I at the time thought was really odd, was I get she's a bigger body. I mean, you look at she's 5'10", and that's what tied for the tallest on your forward group with Lexia Gia. Like, she is taller, yes, but she doesn't, like, at least early in the season and when I was looking up the player when they acquired her in the offseason before the inaugural year, she doesn't really play a big game and like a big bodied forward. She's not a power forward,
Right.
and she has a great shot that you talked about from game one where she had that kind of fluky goal, but then the really good one for the first two in Torrent franchise history. Um, she's got a great shot. That's she's got. I don't know. Is there anybody better on that? Well, on the inaugural season roster, at least I would say this roster, but there's only like a handful of people on it right now. Um, yeah, they tried to get her to play a more physical game, and you kind of see that as the year goes on. But it's kind of awkward when you're not that player and you're being asked to do that. Um, and I do think it hurt her point production. There were some games she looked pretty good doing it, but I don't know if
Mhm.
that's your best, like, if you want the best of Julia Gosling, and she's only 25,
Yeah.
like, she's got an elite shot. Let's take advantage of that. Let's work with that. We at the 10 game mark, we talked with O'Rourke about her playmaking, and she can play make fine. Like, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about you trying to get her to play a completely different style of forward when I don't know if that's the best way to help you not only score goals but win games. Like, that's what concerned me. And so yeah, what does that look like? She was also Canada. We're going to bring up the Olympics. She was one of Canada's better forwards, I thought,
Mhm.
and she was getting lower line minutes. So yeah, this one I think if of the forward group, you kind of had to protect her, and to me, Daniel Serdachny should be up next.
Mhm.
Um, but we'll see. I'll leave that open to thoughts and interpretations and what you think we should do because they've got two more spots to fill here,
Mhm.
and like I think you at least have to bring it back with the two more, another forward and another D. Like
Yeah.
that's my thought. I've seen someone say all forwards, and I think that's kind of. I think I'd rather have a little more balance.
Yeah, I think that's probably the direction they'll go. We can talk about that in a little bit, kind of where we think they'll go from here. But yeah, I mean, on Julia Gosling, I do think that having the Torrent not be so crowded, particularly up front with the forward group, and all the names that you had last year, like I think it was easier for the coaching staff to kind of bumper down to the second line and say, "Hey, we need you to be more of a net front style player," particularly after the Jesse Eldridge trade, because you had Hillary Knight, who needed to get minutes and play a certain way and kind of needed to be the focal point of a line. You had Alex Carpenter, who you'll still have, but you had Hannah Bilka, who needed to be, in charge and doing her thing. And you had Teresa Schaffzal and all of these other players that were more established, and you needed them to kind of have their opportunities. And so it kind of forced Julia Gosling to be put in this awkward spot where she had to
Yeah.
change her game to kind of complement the rest of them moving forward. Given that you're not going to have Hillary Knight, Hannah Bilka come back, it should allow Julia Gosling to be more in a position where she can shine and she can play her own game and be more of a focal point where she is the one on the top line that is the scoring threat and everybody's trying to get her the puck, or especially on the power play. Her shot on the power play should be the thing that the power play is built around. It was basically impossible for her to get on the first unit last year because of all the names that you had on this team, right? And so I suspect that a lot of that stuff is going to help her out. She's going to be able to play more of her game naturally just because there's not going to be so many star players in that forward group moving forward. So I do think she's a big winner in terms of everybody kind of leaving during the expansion process. That should help her out. Speaking of players leaving the expansion process, as we move into the second phase and everything that happened there, that was when the new expansion teams all had to acquire 5 players through signings and potentially player selection. And in terms of who the Torrent lost a lot of players, and I know that that was difficult for a lot of people out there in the fan base. It was difficult for us on the media side to see these players we've gotten to get to know over the course of the last year and work with leave. But I do think it's important to note this is how the Torrent were built last year. This is what all those other teams of the existing of the original 6 teams fan bases had to deal with, was losing players like Hillary Knight, Kayla Barnes, Hannah Bilka, right? That was what happened that first time around. And so, Torrent kind of getting a taste of that, the fans getting a taste of that. I'm not saying that it still doesn't hurt, but try to keep it in perspective there that we, essentially only had those players because those players were taken from other pre-existing teams last time around. That being said, Charles, Torrent were hit exceptionally hard. It feels like
Oh,
of
yeah.
of the teams in the league, Torrent definitely lost up there, with some of the most and certainly the big names. Kayla Barnes and Hannah Bilka end up going into Detroit, signing there. Hillary Knight will be going to Detroit via Las Vegas. So the 3 of them are all going to be going to Detroit, and I do think that kind of makes sense for them. The coach hired by Detroit has been a member of the Team USA staff for many years, so there's a lot of familiarity and already a relationship there with those players. They understand what kind of play style he's going to want and ask of them, and so I kind of understand why the 3 of them would want to team up there and kind of go the Detroit route. We got news earlier today that Carter is going to be joining the Vegas team. So it's another piece lost on the blue line for the Torrent. Nice physical presence back there. I'm sure Megan Turner would have loved to have her back. But your thoughts so far on the players that the Torrent have lost?
Yeah, it's I gotta be a little bit honest here. I was surprised that Vegas went with a Megan Carter instead of maybe like an Emily Brown, someone who's a veteran, well, more so a veteran than Megan Carter at least, has leadership experience. However it may be with Vegas's roster, they've got a pretty solid 4D, and then they've got one forward,
Mhm.
technically one forward because they have a forward listed who's not going to be there
Yes.
past the 16th. Obviously, the big one's Hillary, right? And there's a lot of thoughts on this, and I think it's complicated because I don't know if we'll ever know what went down to lead to this, but like again, this expansion process is difficult, or what's the expansion distribution process is the official wording from the PWHL. It's very difficult, because I think no matter what, if they protect Hillary instead of Carpenter, people are going to be upset. Why didn't you protect Carpenter? It was tough. Even Hillary, people are like, oh, I don't agree with villainizing Hillary, first of all. I don't think that's fair because people are like, oh, she said she wanted to be into Seattle. I think that was very legitimate.
Mhm.
You know, from all the different leagues she's played in previously to, when she played in Boston, Seattle gave her the best professional experience, I think, from Climate Pledge Arena to the fan base support, to the players around her. Best probably experience she had outside of what, the Olympics,
Yeah.
when you're playing with the best of from the country. Um, so like I don't there are folks who are spelling she didn't like it here. I disagree with that. As someone who was around the team, like I disagree with that. And I do think she wanted to be here. But yeah, like this expansion process with how it is in the EFO, the EFO is kind of like what the franchise tag in the NFL. Like you don't really have a choice if they hit you with that. It's that or you get traded, which will happen if people are not aware. Hillary was in discussions with Detroit. And when Detroit signed Daryl Watts to the EFO to be their EFO, Vegas had also wanted to make Hillary their EFO. So it slides to Vegas, and Vegas is kind of in control of her rights at this point. And she says, I'm not going to play for you. So there's kind of this handshake deal in place once the trades are allowed to go through on the 16th. That Hillary will go to Detroit, I think, for a first round pick, but it hasn't been
Yeah.
made specific which first round pick it is, because we don't know the draft order, Dylan.
Yeah, draft's a week
Um,
away. Still don't know the draft order. That's cool.
so it's very the Hillary discussion is very tough for me to talk about because, again, this is one of the greatest players of all time, maybe what the
Mhm.
greatest power forward of all time.
Mhm.
An incredible leader. We heard her teammates talk about it throughout the year, even at the end of the season. Uh, Trade acquisition, Teresa Schaffsall talked about playing with her. It's very difficult, and people are like, oh, you made her the face of her franchise. Yeah, I don't think the team knew they were gonna be forced to make a three-player selection of what 26 is it on the roster, Dylan?
Yeah.
Like it's very difficult, and so I think there were going to be frustrations either way. I think the way it all played out is kind of rough because you get Hannah Bilka and Kayla Barnes, two other fan favorites,
Mhm.
right, who have kind of made stops together everywhere, with Boston College, I believe it was, and then Ohio State, um, and then obviously Seattle, and now the fourth one being Detroit. Of course they're going to want to play with someone they idolize, and have played with on the international scale. But it does look a bit rough when you've got three players that were fan favorites, and are big names, and they all go to the same spot together. Um, it was always going to be rough. I think if the expansion process was different, they end up back here, but that's not how this is. Um, Kayla Barnes, I was kind of mixed on, and maybe this is controversial, but and she's not, I've gotten some heat for like, oh, well, they picked the younger defender with Anna Wilgren. Barnes is only 27, so she's not
Yeah.
super old, but I don't know if her point production like has necessarily the development's been there as much as you'd like over the last few years. Like she's been playing hockey since what 2014, 2013 in the
Mhm.
USA circuit. Um, and some of the penalties, man, I just think were unforced errors. Uh, so I'm kind of like Anna Wilgren, Kayla Barnes. I'm kind of fine. And Anna Wilgren's a left shot D. So if you end up getting a Layla Edwards, that can be your top pairing.
It's pretty good.
Right. And then with Hannah, look, I get it. She's exciting. She's a fast skater. But as you talked about earlier this season, like a lot of the production points wise was on the power play. Um, and this is what the second time in the last 2 years, her first two seasons in the PWHL, she's been on LTIR. So there's some concern there, and if the game that general manager Megan Turner wants her team to play is kind of a heavy game, does Hannah Bilka match that? It's kind of a different. It's not quite in line with that. So to me, it makes sense. Is it hard? Sure. It's
Mhm.
understandable. It's going to be very interesting to see what Detroit looks like, what reception those players get when they come back to Climate Pledge Arena. But it like I seeing the vision going back to that, I understand it. With Megan Carter, yeah, again, like I kind of mentioned, I thought she was going to be back. I was really excited for that. But hey, she gets opportunity in Vegas with a pretty good blue line with Kendall Cooper and Ambrose and Mae Batherson. Yeah, I do wonder now if you're Seattle, the likelihood of being able to bring back an Annette Terralova and Emily Brown, two players who are regularly kind of in the top four for you defensively. So that's where I'm at with that, Dylan. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Corinne Schroeder
Oh, yes,
goes to
yes.
San Jose. Yeah, it makes sense. Again, when they protected Hannah Murphy, and even I went back, I did this piece on Corinne kind of filling in for the head goaltender coach Sheldon Gortson when he was with the Team Canada U18 women's team. Corinne talked about, just like you'll chuckle when you hear this, Dylan, how it's been tough for her not really getting a rhythm because there were rotating starts with her and Hannah Murphy. Sounds a lot like Philip Grubauer, who I've heard a lot
Yeah,
talk about needing rhythm to kind of, and I get it,
yeah,
don't get me wrong, Corinne's only what, 27? She's played some great hockey in her career, dating back to the Boston Pride days. But this gives her an opportunity to stay on the West Coast. She said she liked it out here. I saw her in late May, and she was going to go get on a ferry. She wanted to experience the ferries before she left. Yeah, it makes sense. Like this again, when they protected Hannah Murphy, it's tough, but you have to make a decision. And what, Murph's 5 years younger than her, so like yeah, that's that one. That one, I think there's less, like there's a lot of emotion around the Detroit players. I don't think, I think everyone to Corinne Shorter's like, it's okay, you're fine.
yeah. We get
Um,
it.
yeah,
There's
100%.
only there's only so many goalies that could go around, and the Torrent made their call on the one that they were going to keep there. And I think similar to that decision there between Schroeder and Murphy was the Anna Wilgren, Caleb Barnes one. Less so based off of the age element of it, but I think based off of, as you mentioned before, maybe the potential, the ceiling, the growth still that could come there. Caleb Barnes very much a known quantity at this point. We know exactly who Caleb Barnes is as a player, what she's going to bring. Anna Wilgren, somebody who's still developing, who they still, like I said earlier, Megan Turner mentioned that they still feel like she has room for growth and can continue there. And so you can potentially see her, kind of massively outscoring what Kayla Barnes was going to be able to do and play physical and match the team identity and stuff. So I feel like that's kind of where that decision of Anna Wilgren over Kayla Barnes for one of the protection spots lies in. I think you bring up a really good point when it comes to Hannah Bilka about just she has had a difficulty staying healthy. And I also agree that she just probably didn't fit the team identity that Megan Turner wants to build and kind of go for here. And it's tough because you can only protect three. Like I'm sure that's one of the players
Right.
that would have been on the short list if you could say get to five. But at only three, you have to really make the call. And if you wanted to make sure you kept a defender, a goalie, and one forward through that first process, I understand going with Alex Carpenter over both Hillary Knight or Hannah Bilka, just because as amazing and as much of a still playing living legend Hillary Knight absolutely is, she will be 37 when next season starts. And like I said earlier, you have to think about kind of building for the future. You want to have some continuity on your roster for the on ice product, but also for the fan base. And when you're talking about a player kind of getting to that level, somebody who's already talked about retiring and how much longer potentially they're going to be playing in Hillary Knight's case, I understand not wanting to use one of such a finite amount of valuable assets like one of the three protection spots on a player like that. I don't think Hillary Knight blames the team. It didn't seem like there was any ill will there. I
Mhm.
think she understands the business. And then, yes, the moment she signed that expansion foundational offer, the EFO, which all four of the expansion teams were given one of those, and that is a binding
Mhm.
pick. That is a binding offer. The decision was well out of the Torrents' hands at that point. Hillary Knight had to sign that with Vegas, and then yeah, she could negotiate to potentially go somewhere else. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's tough to see these players leave. But again, should be the last time that the Torrent have to deal with this for a while in terms of league expansion, and we can kind of move forward and build things out from here. And that's where, we find ourselves right now in this middle of the phase 3 window, where they get some more, expansion spots, or they can sign some free agents and protect them, and we'll kind of continue to see where they go based off of what they've already done. We've already kind of started talking about it. Charles, maybe protecting another forward and another defender. If you had your pick of the players here available for the Torrent to sign and protect, or just protect because they were already under contract, where would you go? I know you're a fan of the, one more forward, one more D. Are there names that you particularly think the Torrent should bring back, or you feel about?
Yeah, I think it has to be the, at least to me, you could maybe, I could understand an argument to change the defender I'm gonna talk about, but I think it has to be Danielle Serdachny and Aneta Terralova. Serdachny, just with what we expected from her coming into the year, right? And and the second half that she had when she got past, some frustrations with Olympics on her own, right? Because she obviously
Mhm.
didn't make the Team Canada roster, and she wrote an op-ed about how frustrating that was and how hard that was for her. We started to see her kind of come into her own, using that speed more that you talked about on multiple occasions, right? Kind of using that to her advantage. Uh, you know, Kind of the versatility as well. She was able to switch between the center position and the wing. Sometimes she looked better on the wing. I thought that was important for her. She's talked pretty openly about liking it here. I wasn't sure if, again, with players coming from different parts of, the continent, you never know, right, how they'll feel about the Pacific Northwest because they've never really been here typically. I mean, maybe they've been to British Columbia, but that's not the same. She's only 25. She's pretty freshly 25. Um, and I think that just gives you the more youth, right? I mean, her and Julia Gosling are 25. You start to build what? Her, Carpenter, Gosling. That's a pretty good trio of forwards to have
Yeah.
going forward, unknowing the rest of the group and what they might look like. So yeah, I think Danielle has to be there. I mean, I can maybe understand a Teresa Schaffsall. Michaela Grant Mentis played some great games for you down the stretch, and earlier on the season too, before she got hurt. Um, like Lexia G is fun, and she's also currently 25. That'll change pretty quickly, but I think Danielle just has to be that, given current production and potential. Because again, even her first year, what, in Ottawa, she didn't get a lot of time or opportunity, and I think she got more of that here this year, regularly playing what, top two lines, and
Yeah.
given the state of the roster now, I'm sure she'll continue to get that. On the defensive side of things, I know we've gotten super young. Aneta Terralova is 30, but like you kind of talked about with having maybe more veteran players, get her in there on the blue line to pair with, not directly pair with, but have down there with Anna Wilgren, just more continuity back there, because we've been talking a lot about forwards, right? I mean, you've only got one D side. Like, you have a bunch of other players who you have under contract. Jenna Buglioni, Bucky, and Lexia G are technically under contract still. You've got one defender under contract. You hold the rights to Lindy Lobdell because you drafted her, but it's outside of that. I mean, Emily Brown's a free agent. Mariah Keppel's a free agent. Emily Zumwinkle, one of your reserves, was a free agent. I, it was a tough year for Aneta. She didn't really ever get going, right? We talk about stops and
Mhm.
starts. She dealt with injury early on, and then she had the suspension for that wicked hit on
Yeah.
Sarah Fillier, which she did apologize for. And so that's where I go. Maybe it's also an emotional pick because Aneta Terralova would shoot pucks at my face through the glass during practice. Who's going to do that if she's gone, Dylan? I don't know. Um, but I would also understand Emily Brown too. She was one of your alternate captains. Another steady presence. She is 27, and she really talked about at exit interviews coming to like it here, wanting to be back here. I know you can only take that for face value, but I think it has to be one of those two. I don't I not to be harsh, it is kind of our job to be honest. I don't kn Mariah Keppel kind of, fell towards the 3rd pairing and at times was like the extra defender, and Lindy
Mhm.
Lobdell got more opportunities. So, I don't think they'd go with her in that position. And with Lobdell, they hold her rights, so they can probably just wait out until we get to normal free agency and say, "Okay, come on back." So I don't know. That's where I would go. I've seen people go with that Serdachny and Bucky, but again, I think going all forwards, it's kind of overload, and I want you to start being able to get back to the blue line there.
Yeah, I think the smart move is probably to add one more forward, one more D. I'm with you. I think Serdachny needs to be one of the players that they bring back and they protect here during phase three, just because of the way that she picked things up late last year, but also because of the identity that Megan Turner keeps talking about, attacking through transition. That is what Serdachny is built to do, and I think that again, similar to Julia Gosling, because there were so many significant names up front for the Torrent last year, it was hard for Serdachny to kind of find her place in all of that, and really for the coaching staff to find her place in all of that. But once things kind of settled down, right? Hannah Bilka, a different kind of fast paced, skill based forward, was out of the lineup. Serdachny could kind of step in and start filling that role a little bit. And that's when the production started picking up. So I think in just a less crowded environment, we'll see a lot more of the actual production from Serdachny. She was still third on the team in points last year, so it's not
That's
like she had a
crazy.
poor year. Also, physical player. She had 28 hits last year, so she had almost a hit per game, fourth on the team in hits. So as Megan Turner talks about wanting a physical presence, particularly in the offensive zone, she mentioned relentless several times. She talked
Hmm.
about the more successful teams in this league attack in waves, and it feels like this wave, like just wave after wave of relentless pressure applied by opposing offenses. Serdachny gives you that, particularly if she's going to stay at center. She gives you a good 2C to have below Alex Carpenter so that you can start building those waves of pressure down your lineup, which I know was the idea last year, but I just think because of everything going on, it wasn't able to fully develop. But I think the potential is still very much there for Serdachny to develop and kind of give you that. As for potentially another forward, I do want them to bring back Teresa Shafzal if possible.
Yeah.
I would not hate that, and I wouldn't hate it if it was Serdachny, Shafzal, and it was all forward heavy, just because
Wow,
the
okay.
scoring's at a premium. Shafzal very much fit in. I think Shafzal is a player who could play with both Carpenter or Serdachny. Very good transition player. She's got the speed. She's got the understanding in the offensive zone, and she can finish too, right? Something we were able to see from her last year. She can put the puck in the back of the net, and so I personally wouldn't hate that, and I would strongly consider it if I was Megan Turner, and just kind of go a little forward heavy here through phase three, and then figure that you can kind of piece together a blue line after that. And hey, look, Hannah Murphy, the goalie you protected, proved that she does well under fire last year. So maybe you could survive with a piecemeal blue line, or if you know kind of where you're picking in the draft and you're thinking about a Layla Edwards being back there, that gives you the ability to not have to worry about the blue line as much. There's certainly lots of stuff there, but I'm a big fan of what Shafzal was able to do with the Torrent last year.
That's a
If
fair shout.
Yeah,
Like,
if they go on the blue line, it's so close for me between Terlova and Emily Brown, 2 different styles of player.
yeah.
I think the offense, and again, if you're talking about wanting to build a relentless transition game, you probably go with Terlova. She leans more offense than Emily Brown does, just in what her game is able to do. She was able to put up the same amount of points as Kayla Barnes last year on this Torrent team. She had 8 points playing in 7 fewer games, and with all the stops and starts and playing injured and all of that that Terlova had to deal with. And so you know that she has that production there. And if she's able to stay healthy, she'll be able to produce even more potentially for you. So I think she's somebody that she fits identity that Megan Turner says she wants to build around. Player who also isn't afraid to throw the body around
Mhm.
as well. Not as much as Emily Brown, somebody who's more of a true stay-at-home defender, but Terralova can have that physical edge to her game. And so I do think Terralova probably is the pick on the back end. That being said, I wouldn't hate Emily Brown either if you wanted a true stay-at-home.
One thing on Terralova, there are some reports that she's kind of being sniffed around the league. I think that's a bad word to use. They're kicking the tires on her. In addition to kind of the other goalies on the market getting looked at right now. So I do wonder if, maybe it's Megan Turner's working on getting that figured out so you can lock that up, or it's Terralova's kind of checking out the market that she's got. I know Terralova, I mean, again, only take so much from face value, but you don't really see a player talk about like Terralova would post at the end of the year. She's like, this is my favorite team ever.
Mhm,
In post, like she really liked it here. I talked to her earlier in the season about because she's kind of made some different changes. I know she was real liked in Ottawa.
mhm,
Um, it was kind of a busy year because what she's Team Czechia as captain. So yeah, no, I do want to go back really briefly. I think Shafsal's a good mention because we talked about it. I wasn't sure about that trade like everybody else because Jesse Eldridge was what racking up the points for you in spite of everything else. She looked like she was in the right place at all times. So yeah, like I still go with my two, but I think once you get through this phase and when you get to a phase, I don't oh the phases, Dylan. When you get to a phase where you can sign players again, I think she needs to be one of your first calls if she makes it through. I think she will, just because of how much talent's going to be out there. And I'm not saying she's not talented, but when like Kendall Coyne Schofield's still a free agent, Grace Zumwinkel's a free agent, just going down kind of like the Minnesota roster and how that looks. Like there's a lot of talented players that are going to be available, and um, I think maybe she slips through the cracks, but she's also what 26, so she's younger. So if there is a franchise out there that says, "Hey, we liked what you did last year, and you're young, and we want to give you a couple years of security," I could very well see someone doing. Yeah, Taylor Gerard's available. Like I do think maybe she'll have an opportunity to kind of slip through the cracks here, but this league's surprising. Again, I didn't expect to see Megan Carter to Vegas this morning, but what are you gonna do?
right, and Vegas is very much a team that I would worry about with Shaftsal just because they have
Oh,
such a need at forward that I think they're
yeah.
gonna have to start digging into the forwards out there. And I do think, like, there's gonna be elements of this at play, right? Like, I think Bucky, Agia, Mariah Keppel, like, these are players that are not gonna be on expansion teams' radars probably, at least not right away. Shaftsal, it's close, right? She was half a point per game player, but put up really good numbers in Seattle. Teams could look at that and say, "Hey, when she was, given this opportunity to kind of shine and play in a significant role, she was able to produce a lot." I could see, one of four general managers being like, "Hey, I want to add this and bring it to my team." So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this phase plays out. We'll only have to wait a couple days, Charles, to see what Megan Turner does, and then we'll move on to phase 4, which is when all players who are not signed are protected through those first 3 phases are eligible to sign with expansion teams,
Uh,
and so that's when the vast majority of the expansion kind of process I feel like is going to play out. The expansion teams have to get up to 10 players during that, so they're all going to be adding 5 players because they had to get to 5 to get out of phase 2. So all
mhm.
the expansion teams will be adding an additional 5 players. That'll be 20 players total. That's when we're going to see about players like a Teresa Shaftsal, right? Does she survive that? Um, we'll find out, and then that will last for 2 days, June 14th and 15th, and then phase 5 will come into play, which is June 16th and 18th because they draft on the 17th, and that's when existing teams can negotiate with and sign their own remaining players on expiring contracts. And so that's when basically everybody on the blue line for the Torrent comes into play. If Shafzal's around, Shafzal will be one of those players. Natalie Snodgrass, Sydney
Mhm.
Langseth. These are the kind of players that you're looking at during that phase 5 window. And that's also when existing teams must make qualifying offers to their draft picks from last year. So Jenna
Okay.
Buglioni being
Right.
kind of the big one there. Obviously, they're keeping Murphy. They protected her, but Bugs, their first round pick from last year, they need to make a qualifying offer in order to retain those rights. That's when that would happen, is during that window there. And also, or I guess it would really be not so much Jenna Buglioni because she was a first round pick. She was signed. It would be more Jada Hebish and Delianetis and Lindy Lobdell. So
Lindy!
that's when those would come in. And I know you're a big fan of Lindy Lobdell and would love to see her back. I think a lot of people would. And then the draft's on June 17th. Again, we'll find out at some point where the Torrent are picking in that. It would be great to know sooner rather than later.
So wild.
It's
Like,
insane. Again, it's a
you
week
could
out.
be taken second overall and get Layla Edwards, and you've got somebody who, arguably top two, top three player in this draft alongside KK Harvey and Abby Murphy. Um, or you could be slotted behind, Dylan, common sense isn't always used, right?
No.
But I would have to think with Seattle being, you talked about this at the height of the show, right? Seattle being hit as hard as they have in expansion, maybe say, hey, here you go. Here's two. We were kind of messing with the idea, but you lost your captain and two fan favorites. Here, have Layla Edwards. Take this. Go on. Yeah, it's pretty because we have no idea if the teams know.
Mhm.
It's not been made public. All we know is Vancouver, and this is on league news releases that Vancouver has won, and it's to be announced at a later date. So, yeah, I think obviously the month of June is kind of wild for this league. But, once we get into the 14th through the 19th, when it goes phase 4 to the open signing period on the 19th, it's going to be it's a long 5 days, Dylan. It's going to
Yeah,
be a
I
long
know.
5 days.
If you're a fan of the PWHL and you think the last week has been crazy, wait for the week to come because,
Yeah.
yeah, it's all gonna lead up to phase 6 on the 19th, which is basically just free agency. That's when
Yeah.
everybody's eligible to sign everybody that's not under contract, and everybody's gotta get up to their 23-player roster plus 3 reserve player lists. So, a ton is going to happen there over the course of the next week, and yeah, we'll just have to wait and kind of see how things play out for the Torrent, who their 2 additional protected spots will be, where they pick in the draft. I would love for them to do something where like maybe the non-playoff teams get to pick and then the expansion teams and then the playoff teams maybe. That would
Okay.
be cool, right? Like
I think
we'll
that's
see.
fair.
Yeah, I think it's fair. So we'll see what they end up doing in terms of draft order and where the Torrent end up. But yeah, getting Layla Edwards would be awesome. Adding an Olympian to make up for the fact that you just lost a ton of Olympians. Just saying something there to consider. But yeah, we'll see how things go, and we'll of course record after the draft and after we know kind of who they protect with the next 2 protection spots and everything like that. Looking forward to talking about it again. One last thing before we go, Charles, is we do have to talk about the coaching change that the Torrent are making. And again, we don't know who the next coach for the Seattle
No.
Torrent is going to be, but we do have to talk about Torrent did let go of head coach Steve O'Rourke, one and done here in Seattle, somebody that you and I very much enjoyed working with, but the results being what they were with the roster that he was given, it's not a total surprise that they decided to make this move.
No, it's tough, and I've said this, kind of as the season went on, and I think anybody who watches sports and sees expansion teams would agree. There's a lot you kind of have to weather throughout the year as an expansion franchise, and especially a coach, let alone dealing with the roster you're given. That's a challenge in and of its own right. Right? Is the expectations of that, getting everybody on the same page, and especially with the Olympic breaks and getting players back from that, and how do you keep your players active and learning the systems, right? We talked 10 games in and they were still installing stuff,
Mhm.
because of how kind of rapid the training camp was. It was what, 2 weeks, and then they went and played in Vancouver. So yeah, it makes sense. It makes total sense from just a few different things. Like as this year went on, I didn't really agree with how aggressive the blue line was, especially when that puts your goaltenders in, some really rough positions. I know some fans were really frustrated with how that Vancouver game went, because if you win that Vancouver game and you get those gold plans, you probably are picking number one overall, and you don't have to worry about not knowing where you get a KK Harvey. So I get it, but I do think, without talking about working with them, because I will in a second, um, I would have understood if they said, "Hey, you get one more year, and if you don't figure it out or the season starts bad, you're gone." Um, but it makes sense. Again, with especially with the comments, I asked Megan Turner interviews. I said, "Hey, how did you and your front office, I know Amanda Pelkey is one of their advisors, um, kind of review the season for your coaching staff?" Basically asking, "Hey, is Steve going to be back
Yeah.
next year?" And she said, "Oh, it was something about not wanting to be complacent." I think she said wanting that, they appreciated the job the staff did, but they're going to leave no stone unturned, is I think the exact wording. And obviously that came to fruition. Yeah, but yeah, Steve was great to work with. He liked it here. Like, he really, I swear, Dylan, I told you this. If you had just seen him out in Fremont, you would think he'd lived here. Like, he wouldn't
Mhm.
blink twice. He fit in. He really liked it here. He really liked looking at like the native artwork in the area. And I think he really liked his players. He really, uh, like, I remember CJ got their first start, and when we were waiting for him to come into the room after they talked, he gave CJ a big hug and was talking to them, because that was a tough game, right, for your first
Mhm.
start. And then there's that wild Vancouver game, and a lot of the players you talked about, going down the list of players that are available and free agents and forwards. Natalie Snodgrass at Exit Reviews, it kind of got skipped over by some people. He mentioned, hey, she thought about retiring this season, and how she had kind of lost her love for the game. And she had a pretty solid year. I thought
Mhm.
she dealt with that third line of her, Bucky, and Agia was great,
Yeah.
and then kind of got hurt with injuries from Bucky. I think Lexi dealt with some stuff. Excuse me. And then, they had other injuries, so they had to shuffle up that line. But, by no means do I think was it like there was anything negative with Steve outside of the results. It was just, they didn't do enough. The power play was kind of inconsistent, right? The penalty kill, I think the penalty kill was pretty decent, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly. But yeah, just maybe kind of some of the stuff like the blue line being more aggressive than maybe it should be, and not changing that as the year went on, and you kept dealing with what you talked about, waves of pressure against your own team. Um, Julia Gosling, and yeah, I disagree with making her a power forward or trying to. But yeah, there's a lot from them having to wait to get their office set up, like the staff as a whole having to bring home laundry and get laundry done because they didn't have the office set up. You know, see, I'm talking a lot, my throat's all dry, but yeah, I think you can't tell the story of this inaugural season without mentioning the complications of how the year went on. Because
Mhm.
we've been asked before by other media professionals, "Hey, what do you think of Steve O'Rourke?" Right? We got asked that a lot,
Yeah.
and I just don't think it's fair. And I know not everything's fair. This is a results-driven business. Someone
It
told me.
is.
Um, you have to win, and I'm glad that Megan Turner, recognizes that, doesn't want to be complacent, has been public about that, but it's tough for the person, right? Because he was very insightful. It wasn't a
Mhm.
lot of coach speak. It wasn't a lot of, even one of the things you bring up, Jenna Buglioni, the concussion was really rough. She had a rough start to the year. He said, hey, maybe we would have handled that differently by not flying her, because she flew to Boston with them when they played in Lowell,
Mhm.
and she suited up, but she didn't play. And it's like, hey, maybe you leave her home. Like, concussions are hard. So yeah, I don't know. He said he wanted to coach in the women's game. This was his first venture into that, because he'd spent time in the OHL, the CHL, sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's tough, but it makes sense. It 100% makes sense. Is my overarching point here.
Yeah, I think he handled all of the stuff of setting up the team and everything extremely well. I think his demeanor, his professionalism,
Yep.
who he was as a person was a great choice for handling all of that stuff. I think, yeah, some of the hockey ideas were difficult to implement given the timeline he had to work with and the person, quite frankly, the fact that it's a 30 game schedule, right? So it's just not always easy to um, you don't have as many games as you do on the men's side of things, where you're talking about in the CHL, 68 game season, you're talking about 70 plus games, AHL, stuff like that, right? Where you have a bit more time to install systems or make adjustments over the course of the year. You can afford to be patient when when
Right.
a decision you make, such as your blue line being aggressive, isn't working. When you're talking about a 30 game season, which the PWHL is, you can't be patient and wait and see if that develops and gets better. Or if you're going to, it's a gamble. And if you lose that bet, it just means that you have the season the Torrent had, right? And so I think that there was an element of that maybe he wasn't prepared for or didn't quite respect until the process was underway. I know I didn't until following the Torrent this year, right?
Mhm.
Just how difficult that is when you're talking about only 30 games and
Yep.
that being less than half of what you'd have to work with in a different league from a coaching standpoint. So I think that that definitely came into play. I think he's a good player development coach. I think obviously he comes from junior hockey. That's what his background is, and I think that he was good on that side of things. But yeah, when you're talking about a 30 game season, when you're talking about a roster that was full of Olympians and star players and very much built to have won in the present and in the now, I don't know that necessarily made him the right fit for the Torrent last year. And I think that that's why you see them move on from him kind of moving forward. Is just I just don't know that it all kind of worked out given what the team needed last year. I think they probably needed somebody who was more win now and also more experienced on the women's side of the game,
Mm.
just in understanding what systems work, what systems those players know and are used to, and you can kind of hit the ground running faster than they were. And I think that a lot of this is in a different situation. He would be kept on for another year as you
Mm.
transition in this expansion process, and you are going to have more younger players, and you want to focus on development a little bit more. But I think because of the expectation that last year's roster had around it,
Right.
it's just hard to come back from, performing as poorly as they did given the names and the star power that they had attached to it. And I think we're seeing that play out in Seattle being hit hard during this expansion process while Seattle fans are looking at Vancouver, the other expansion team, and they haven't lost anybody. Not a single player has left
Crazy.
the Golden Eyes. And I think that one, it's tough to see that if you're a Seattle fan, but I will say I look at that and I go, the Seattle players were in demand, right?
Yeah.
Teams aren't out there scrambling to try to sign those Golden Eyes players. They were out there trying to scramble to sign the Seattle Torrent players, and it just kind of goes to show how good this Torrent roster really was last year. And unfortunately, on the flip side of that, it means how much they underperformed. And I think when you have a roster that underperforms like that, it's hard to keep the coach in any sport in any league.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think you bringing up if they were more win now, that goes back to the protection list. Because if they knew they were going to be able to maybe go for it a little bit more and go for a Walter Cup, they probably protect Hillary.
Yeah.
But I think that's not the vision here. Um, and my other thing is too, Dylan, like it's so tough, I think, with this league, because it's not super obvious who coaching candidates are. In the NHL, they
Mhm.
rotate guys,
Yeah.
you know. Like there's no David Carl here for you to go and try and poach, you know. People have floated the idea of Jess Campbell, and I think if that was the case, it would have been done already.
Mhm.
I just don't know. You have to think for Jess, the pay in the NHL, which she surely had interest because there's a report about her in Vancouver,
Mhm.
the Canucks. So I got to specify,
Yeah.
they both have teams. The NHL money and the PWHL money is different.
Mhm.
Like you have to think about that. Um, and that's another, that'd be her first time being a head coach, right? Like that's a little difficult. So I don't know, Dylan. Do you have any thoughts on who a coach could be? Because we haven't really, there's been no ties to anything. I
Right.
know on the call, I believe Megan Turner said they were getting close to that,
Mhm.
but it will be really interesting to see if it's like an assistant from somewhere else. I don't know if they like promote a Christine Bumstead or a Clayton Beatos. It's funny actually. I saw Clayton Beatos at KEXP before a Storm game. He was checking out the records store in
Oh,
there
nice.
and talking about how much he liked the area and how great, like right
I
now
was
where
gonna
we're
say it
at.
sounds very Seattle.
Right. He was doing that. It's another question too with the assistants. Do we know if they'll be back? We don't.
Right.
Usually, right, if you bring in a new head coach, they kind of want their people. Um, so yeah, I don't. It's going to be really interesting to see if it's like an assistant from another team in the league. I don't know if they go overseas or if it's someone in the NCAA ranks, and even then, there's not a ton of maybe top options. So until maybe women's hockey grows a bit more collegiately, get some teams on the West Coast, of course. Um, it's going to be hard, I think, to find like super clear cut candidates for coaching jobs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally do. And I think that, I don't have anybody particular in mind, but I can say that just based off of what, some of the expansion teams have done, like I mentioned it earlier with Detroit.
Yeah.
I'm just going to double check the name before I say it
Manon.
out loud. But you look at Detroit bringing in Josh Skiba, somebody from
Right.
Team USA, right? Somebody who has a relationship with some big players in this league. They were able to use that to bring in Caleb Barnes, Hannah Bilka, Hillary Knight, right? Because they know and respect him and they know what he's going to expect out of them. Like that's I think significant. And so I think you have to look at the national team level and you look at the head coaches there, but the assistants as well, because he's an assistant with Team USA. I think you have to, yeah, look at the college ranks, but all the top college coaches, they've got a good thing going at their
Right.
university, right? Like, I don't know that the PWHL is at a place right now where it makes sense for them to make that jump and for them to come up to the professional game. They probably have competitive, if not better, salaries where they are if they're very entrenched and very respected and known for winning. Those schools probably are going to pay them more than the PWHL will, and they'll have more control over their roster and what their program is able to do versus the PWHL, where there will be a front office that's going to be making a lot of those personnel decisions and things like that. So I think the national teams is the way to go, and
Yeah.
I would explore the European national teams too, right? Like don't just limit it to Team Canada or Team USA. Go out there, look at Team Sweden, look at Team Finland, look at Team Czechia, look at those coaching staffs, interview the players that you have the ability to interview. Hey, ask them about it. Hey, how do you like working with this person when you're with the national team, right? Like that's a very easy in-house thing that you can do, and you'll get an idea of the coaches out there that players enjoy working with and want to play for. So that would be my suggestion. We'll see what direction the Torrent end up going in. My guess is that, yeah, the coaching stuff had to be put a little bit on the back burner for these 2 weeks while all the expansion process plays out. But yeah, it does sound like, hopefully shortly before or after the draft, will get an announcement there. Don't know for sure, but that was kind of the timeline I was getting the vibe of.
Yeah. Because what? I mean, during the expansion draft, they had that coach from Northwestern in the room with Megan Turner, but he didn't get up like because that was kind of the rumor at the time, right? It was
Yeah.
going to be Northwestern's coach that ended up taking the spot, but then he didn't get signed on, and it was O'Rourke, and O'Rourke was I think the draft might have been his
Yeah.
first big thing, the entry draft that is. So yeah, maybe what that's what's the timeline
Again,
on
sometime
that?
in the next week or two.
Which is yeah, pretty wild. Sometime before the 17th. So Hey, you're the coach of the Seattle Torrent now. We have a draft. Let's
Mm.
go. Like,
Yep.
I'm sure they're scouting um, pretty decently. I do wonder with the draft too, and we can't really get into it because who knows, right? But outside of course, the first round, because who knows what's going to go on there. What Seattle's able to do outside of that? Because I mean, Dylan, like maybe an underrated part of that is a lot of their picks ended up like playing decent amount of games for them, from Lindy to Lily Delianidis and Jada Habish. Coming in after Delianidis was a healthy scratch and Habish um, was a reserve player. They ended up playing a decent amount down the stretch, so like they
Mhm.
got production out of them. It's not like they were just kind of sitting there, and with Bugs, it's just tough to kind of
Yeah, the injuries
for
made
me
that
to
tough.
grade her. Yeah, just with how that went. And hopefully she's able to have a good off season and maybe look like the player that Ohio State Jenna was, because I think more opportunity will be there for her to be what, a middle six
Mhm.
player. So yeah, no, I think that's an underrated thing, is like how much they were actually able to get usage wise out of their draft picks, outside of what, Olivia Wallen, who they ended up cutting and going to Ottawa. So
Yeah. No, I mean, as the league continues to expand and the overall talent pool gets stretched, the draft picks are going to become more and more important for
right.
all the teams in the PWHL. Just being able to add in players there, you're going to start seeing more of those second round or later players having to become more impact players, just because there's just not there's just not going to be enough existing professional level talent to go around when there's just more and more teams added to the league. So the other thing is this year's draft is exceptionally deep. Lots of players declared for this year's draft. Having the PWHL and it being in the position that it's in, more and more players are wanting to either leave the college ranks and enter it, but also come over from Europe and enter the draft that way. So I think it's a good opportunity for the Torrent, particularly if they are going to be able to be picking high, not just in the first round, but in all the rounds, to be able to really add some talent. Because I think this year and for the next year or two, these drafts are going to be very talent packed, particularly with the European players. And I think that that's going to be very important for the Torrent to take advantage of, is bringing in players that are essentially already pros or have pro level experience overseas, and being able to bring them in. You're going to be able to plug and play with them a lot faster and not have to develop them as much and get them up to speed at the professional level. So we'll see. And hopefully Megan Turner is able to take advantage of that.
She's
All
gonna be
right.
busy, that's for sure.
Yeah, she's gonna be very, very busy. Don't envy how much she has to do here over the course of the next week. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Downpour. So great to be able to talk to you again, Charles, here on the podcast. We definitely will not have as long of a break before the next episode. Like I said, we'll try to get together after the draft and after the rest of the expansion phases play out, and we'll discuss what Megan Turner ends up doing. And again, fingers crossed for that high draft pick a week from today. Thanks so
Oh,
much for listening, everybody, and we will see you all next time.